Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. The late 80s were a wild time for Tom Petty. He'd been playing with the Heartbreakers for over a decade, and he'd recently joined the supergroup The Traveling Wilburys. He was on top of the folk rock world, and he had just one thing left to do. On a whim, he met up with producer and fellow Wilbury Jeff Lynne, and the two of them began writing tracks for what would eventually become Petty's first solo album, Full Moon Fever. In one of those sessions, he found himself absent-mindedly hammering out a nice simple riff on a keyboard. Lynne liked the sound, but suggested he make it even simpler. Petty obliged, and as a joke, started singing the simplest, most basic lyrics he could think of to go with it. She's a good girl, loves her mama, loves Jesus and America too. Lynne laughed, and Petty kept going until he made his way to the chorus, where Lynne leaned over and offered one word, a word that would echo through the halls of dad rock for decades to come. Free Fallin. From that moment, they knew they were onto something, and the two quickly built the rest of what would become Petty's biggest hit ever. Let's take it apart. The song starts like this. And since we'll be hearing this same chord progression the whole time, I'd like to start by looking at it in a couple different levels of complexity. Let's start with the thing I wrote. It's not right, but it's close enough for now. Here we've got three chords, F, B flat, and C. These are the primary triads in F major, the three most important chords in that key, and they're set up to clearly unambiguously establish F as our root. We start with the 1 chord, a nice comfortable home bass, then go to 4 for a sense of departure, back to 1 for a little rest, then to 5, a directional sound that strongly points us back home. This is functional harmony at its simplest, and for listeners used to this sort of sound, it demands very little attention. That's the foundation this loop is built on. The first level of complexity I'd like to add here is the rhythm. It's played with a pretty standard push chord pattern where instead of holding each chord for the same amount of time, they hit the second one in each bar an eighth note early, cutting off those stable F majors with more adventurous chords. In the second bar, they obscure it even further by holding the B flat over for an extra eighth note, pushing the transitions to and from the F onto offbeats. Without any of that, it'd sound pretty flat. But the rhythm gives it a compelling enough contour to keep the groove going throughout the song. The second level of complexity comes from the harmony, because these aren't the chords he's playing. They're close, but they're not quite right. He does play the F majors, but the B flat is actually B flat sus2, and the C is C sus4. These obscure the qualities of the chords and give the progression a sense of openness and intrigue. Now, of course, the qualities aren't actually all that hidden. The song is fairly obvious about its tonality, so even if we're not hearing major triads, they're still strongly implied. But by leaving them out of the specific chord voicings, it takes on a more ethereal, shimmering sound rather than a strictly functional one. This is especially significant for the C chord. Like I said, 5 wants to point back to 1, and a big part of how it does that is via the leading tone. This is the 7th of the key, in this case E, and that's exactly the note that gets replaced by the suspension. Instead of the F being the target of the resolution, it's just kinda already there. But there's another level here in the voice leading. F major, B flat sus2, and C sus4 are all extremely similar chords. They all contain both F and C, which means that, well, in one sense, this is a moving chord progression. It's also kinda just this melody over a static F power chord. In fact, we could label these all as different kinds of F sus chords if we wanted to. I don't think that's the most compelling analysis, because once the bass comes in, it strongly implies a changing root, but the fact that we could demonstrates just how much overlap exists between these three chords, and just how little motion is going on underneath the surface. And our final level of complexity comes from the accompaniment. So far, I've been talking about these chords as if they were just abstract harmonic objects, but they're not. They're real sounds played on real instruments. Specifically, there's Tom Petty's 12-string acoustic guitar, Jeff Lynne's 6-string acoustic, and Lynne again on a synthesizer. The synthesizer part is pretty quiet, just there to provide a little bed for the sound to rest on, so let's focus on the guitars. To my ears, the dominant sound is pretty clearly Petty's 12-string. 12 strings tend to have this rich, shimmering quality to them, and here it almost feels like a heat mirage, an ode to the desert that Petty's beloved Los Angeles was built in. Len's 6-string, meanwhile, is more subtle, buried in the background, but he's doing something pretty fascinating. He's playing C major. Again, Petty's playing C sus4, as is the synthesizer. That's clearly the intended harmony here, and it fits nicely with the voice leading in the rest of the progression. But despite all that, Len's part has a pretty clear E in it. I mentioned this to my friend and fellow YouTuber Amy Nolte, who suggested I look up what they do live, so I did. It turns out that most of the live recordings don't do anything like this guitar setup. He tends to play this on a single 6-string electric. But he does still play the sus4, so that answers that. This E is an anomaly. So what's it doing? To me, Free Fallin' is a song about the duality of freedom. The ability to do whatever you want whenever you want is a blessing, but it also means there are no guardrails to keep you from careening off the edge. The song feels hopeful and uplifting, but the lyrics are full of stories about him hurting people he cares about. And they're also full of driving images, which is kind of the ultimate expression of that duality. A car is freedom of motion, especially in a city like Los Angeles. Trust me, I live here, and outside of a couple specific neighborhoods, you really can't get much of anywhere without driving. But last year, there were over 40,000 car accidents in LA County alone, including hundreds of fatalities. Freedom is responsibility. And that's what this chord says to me. Now, I don't want to be too literal here. I'm not just saying there's two different chords and thus duality. It's more subtle than that. The C major isn't really loud enough to register as a second chord. Petty's 12-string dominates the mix, so the whole thing still feels like C sus4. The E is too buried to be a real chord tone, but it's just present enough to make the F in Petty's part feel wrong. When I listen to it, I can hear that F stabbing me in my left ear in a way that doesn't really happen in the live versions without this hidden E. It draws your attention to the way the suspension is subverting the implied harmonic function of the chords, and it serves as a reminder that the open space promised by that suspended harmony doesn't come without risk. But as interesting as they are, Free Fallin' isn't really a song about chords. It, along with the rest of Full Moon Fever, is largely a dialogue between the down-home performance practices of Tom Petty and the extravagant production of Jeff Lynne. The two were extremely careful to strike the right balance between their artistic voices, and listening to Free Fallin' reveals just how well they managed to walk that tightrope. The whole song is built from a production technique called progressive layering, where you play the same thing over and over but keep adding new parts on top of it. This gives the listener a clear, unambiguous foundation that never really changes, while still introducing fresh new elements throughout the song. In this case, that foundation is the 2-bar guitar loop we've been talking about. While they change dynamics a couple times, the combo of Petty and Lynne playing chords at each other is our anchor, staying pretty constant for most of the song. But what about the other layers? Well, let's look at all of them. Strap in, because this might take a while. I should note that a lot of these will, on their own, seem pretty simple, and yeah, that's the point. They all need to fit together, so they all need to make space for each other. By the end of the song, there'll be like a dozen things playing at the same time, so if one layer gets too complex, it can throw off the whole balance. As with so much art, it's not just about the individual brushstrokes. It's about how they come together to make a painting. Anyway, the intro starts with just a basic statement of our primary layer, the guitars. Or, well, okay, there's also the synth. But again, that's pretty quiet. And also in the second half, there's this high bass part, which feels almost like a musical sunrise to me. Or maybe it's a camera panning up over the edge of a cliff to reveal the sprawling urban landscape of LA. That seems overly specific, but again, I live here. I've seen that exact thing hundreds of times while driving around the city, and the ringing F with a subtle slide in the upper register of the bass doesn't not evoke that image. Once our theme is established, we move into the verse. Here, the bass settles down into its lower register, returning to its main job of defining the root motion between chords. But the big new layer is, of course, the vocals, so let's take a quick detour and talk about the melody. It's a pretty small one. All the verses take place within the major third between F and A. I tend to find that melodies with limited ranges sound conversational, almost spoken, but here, Petty uses a very deliberate sort of phrasing with held notes and clear melodic structures, which keep it feeling very sung. The whole thing is built on two alternating phrases, kind of like a call and response. In the first, he walks up quickly from F to A, drops back down, then walks back up again more slowly.
She's a good girl, loves her mama.
Rhythmically, he follows the same basic shape as the chords, so the two parts fit together effortlessly. Ending on an A here is interesting. It's a pretty stable note in the key, but because he's singing it over the C chord and he's sliding up to it from that chord's G, it adds yet another note to the already muddled harmony and winds up feeling pretty unresolved to my ears. The second phrase is similar, but this time he stays on G at the end.
Loves Jesus in America too.
And it feels a little more stable. Anyway, after the verse we get an interlude, and with it our next layer, Phil Jones's drums. This introduces an explicit beat with our first real percussion sound. The pattern itself is pretty straightforward. It's a basic rock beat with a syncopated kick to emphasize the pushed chord changes. This feels to me like where the song really starts. Everything before this point was building up to it, and everything after will be building on top of it, but this is the ground floor. The drums are our guide to the shape of the song, with Jones setting up most of the section transitions with little drum fills. Like when he first comes in, he plays this. Now, obviously, drummers do this sort of thing all the time, but I still think it's worth highlighting here specifically because of how it interacts with the progressive layering technique. So much of the musical structure remains the same throughout the song, so having these little on-ramps that signal a significant change helps maintain a sense of momentum and clarity. Constantly adding new layers can eventually become exhausting, and it starts to feel artificial. These little fills provide a sense of continuity, smoothing over the seams between different sections so it all feels organic. It's a small and obvious touch, but the song wouldn't really work without it. After the interlude, we get another verse, combining the vocal layer and the drum layer in one section, and then they throw us into the chorus. Here, the guitars get a little bit louder, and the band adds two more instruments. First, Jones picks up a tambourine, playing these constant 16th notes that contrast with the 8th note bass drum part. This denser rhythm helps fill the much larger gaps in the melody, which we'll talk about in a minute, and it adds a greater sense of urgency to the chorus. The other new instrument here is a second buzzier bass line doubling the first. This isn't all that obvious in the full mix, and I think it's serving more of an acoustic role than a composition one. It's a louder section, so the soft, warm bass risks getting drowned out. Adding a double with a slightly brighter tone helps the part cut through and be heard. As such, I don't know if this really counts as a new layer, but it's there, so why not talk about it? That leaves us with the vocals.
And I'm free.
There's three main changes here from the verse. First, there's that really prominent echo whose impact is probably pretty obvious. Echoes happen in large empty spaces, so slapping one on Petty's voice conjures the image of him like standing on a mountaintop while he declares his freedom into the great wide open. The second change is the phrasing. In the verse, he never stops singing for more than like a beat or two, but in the chorus, he leaves almost 2 full bars between words. This again plays to that sense of openness and opportunity implied by the echo, and it leaves room for other layers that we'll see later in the song. And the third change is the register. Now, interestingly, this chorus occupies the same major third between F and A that we saw in the verse, he's just doing it up an octave. Melodically, it does finally resolve to F,
Free falling.
but the metric placement of the resolution on beat 2, a weak beat right before the next chord change, keeps it from feeling too complete. His delivery also tends to de-emphasize the F, either by closing it quickly,
Falling.
or sliding off it,
Falling.
which again helps dull the resolution so the song can keep moving. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the lyrics here because they're the perfect encapsulation of that duality I was talking about. On the one hand, he's free. He can do whatever he wants, go wherever he wants, and no one's gonna stop him. But at the same time, he is free-falling, and it's only a matter of time before he hits the ground. From there, they move directly into the third verse, which is the first time we see them really remove layers. The acoustic guitars quiet back down, and the tambourine and electric guitar stop playing. This puts us back in roughly the same space as the second verse, but with a couple tweaks. Instead of the normal bass line, Len starts by playing that same thing from the intro, which again feels like a sunrise, marking this verse off as the start of a new musical day. From there, he walks down the scale on some conveniently placed chord tones, before finally falling down into the lower register and returning to the groove. This higher bass line, along with the removal of multiple elements from the arrangement, gives this section a sort of lightness, gently floating through the section transition until it finally settles back down on the ground floor. The only other thing I need to highlight here is the background vocals, which harmonize the end of the first phrase.
Ventura Boulevard.
This part is positioned right at the end of that bass walk down, giving it a greater sense of landing. It's also our introduction to the background vocals, and it's one of the few things that never really comes back. The next time we hear other voices, they'll have split off from Petty's melody to sing their own part. By foreshadowing them here, they're telling us that this is a thing that's gonna happen, but without adding a whole new line that might get in the way. And that's an important point. Good progressive layering isn't just about writing a bunch of parts that sound good together. It's also about controlling when and how you introduce new information. Without this harmony part, the later background vocals would still work just fine, but they'd be a bit more surprising. Here, though, we have a section where we're trying to remove energy, which means there's no other new parts being added, so it's a perfect place to drop a little clue about where we're going. Next, we move on to the second chorus, which is pretty similar to the first. The tambourine is back, as is the second bass, but if there's any new layers, I can't hear them. This chorus serves as more of a stepping stone, the last hurrah of our primary energy level before we leap into the more adventurous back half of the song, so let's skip ahead to that. It starts with a section that, for lack of a better name, I'm gonna call the exposition. Calm down, Sonata fans, I don't mean it like that. What I mean is that after the chorus, the lead vocals drop out and they spend some time introducing a couple new layers that are gonna be important later on. The first of these is Mike Campbell on a 12-string electric playing a short little lick that once again walks around in the major third between F and A. This mirroring of the vocal melody's range makes the lick feel familiar, while it establishes the electric guitar as a sound to listen for later on. The other new sound is the background vocals, which have split off from the lead to sing a more syncopated supporting part.
Free falling, I'm a free falling, I'm a.
This, to me, is the iconic Free Fallin' line, and it's the one I gravitate toward when I'm singing along. It's got this bouncy, infectious groove to it. A lot of the layers include some form of eighth note syncopation, and this line takes that and ramps it up to 11, hitting every offbeat eighth note, plus this one extra attack in the middle on beat 4. It's an explicit celebration of familiar rhythmic structures, introducing a new idea that we feel like we already know. It also features a familiar harmonic idea, emphasizing that moving line over static harmony thing we talked about earlier. All that, plus the preview of this texture in the second verse, gives it a strong anthemic quality that's really satisfying both to listen to and to sing, and from here on out it's gonna be all over the song. Once these two ideas are established, we move into the fourth verse, which is probably the most significant texture change in the entire song, mostly due to one little tweak. In the choruses, Jones has been playing a constant 16th note pulse on tambourine, which is a fairly quiet background instrument in a fairly loud, energetic section. Here, he takes that same pulse and moves it to the most prominent part of the drum kit, the snare, and hey, suddenly it's a march. The snare is so much louder than a tambourine, and it cuts through so much better that placing it here in a section that's already quieter than the chorus anyway means it completely takes over the mix. Many of our familiar layers are still there. The guitars are chugging along, the lead vocals are doing their thing, the synth is sitting behind it all, and the bass is playing a variation on its intro pattern, just like it did in the third verse. But by changing the composition of one layer, the section becomes almost unrecognizable while still fitting perfectly with the rest rest of the song. Or, okay, it's not actually the only new layer here. While most of it is the same as previous verses, there are a couple new things going on in the background. First, there's a few voices singing a basic pad to match the chord changes underneath the lead,
Glad down.
which provides a little more harmonic support so the chords can still be heard over that pounding snare. More interestingly though is this almost yodeling response line. I feel like this serves a similar purpose to the echo in the chorus. Because of its position in the mix, it feels like it's sounding from a long way off, again implying a large open space that we're welcome to play around in. Taken together, all these changes make this verse feel like a radical departure from the formula, but by keeping all the most important layers intact, the formula stays just predictable enough to let you keep up. That's the strength of progressive layering. But the song still doesn't want to lose you completely, so in the third chorus it switches back to the same basic configuration they've done every time. The 16th notes move back to the tambourine, and the guitars once again take center stage. But there's still a twist. Remember those anthemic background vocals from the exposition section? They're back, filling in the gaps in Petty's sparse melody.
I'm free falling, I'm free falling, free falling.
This helps explain why that melody was so sparse to begin with. It wasn't complete. That's always a really important consideration with these sorts of layered pieces. In the end, everything needs to fit together, so it's important for the early layers to leave room for the later ones. We've already heard both these parts on their own, and they each work independently, but once they come together, it's clear that's how they were really meant to be heard. After the chorus is a quick breakdown where we get our last new layer. Sort of. Here, the acoustics drop out for the first time in the whole song, leaving just the drums and Campbell's electric guitar. It's playing a variation of the bass part, and by removing everything else, we're forced to really listen to this new sound. Or again, it's not entirely new. We already heard the guitar in the exposition section, and we've been hearing this line in the bass the whole time. Instead, it's a natural continuation of things we already know, presented in a new way in order to give us a bit of a break before the final chorus. Speaking of which, let's look at that. I'm going to play the last chorus, and using everything we've talked about so far, I want you to see how many of these layers you can pick out. Ready? Go. By my count, there's the acoustics, the synth, the bass, the tambourine, the drums, the electric, the lead vocals, the anthem vocals, and the yodeling vocals all stacked on top of each other. There's almost nothing we've heard in this song that isn't here in some form or another. A couple specific parts are missing, like the marching snare and the intro bass, but even then, their component parts are mostly still hiding in it somewhere. This section is the entire song condensed into one musical event. Every single idea they've introduced throughout the piece has been building to this moment, and once it all comes together, the only thing left to do is sit there and slowly fade away. And that fade out is a really nice way to end the story of the song. We know he's falling and he's eventually gonna land, but by fading out before he reaches that point, we're invited to reflect not on the inevitable consequences, but on the path that brought him there. That's pretty much it, but before we go, I have a bit of an announcement about the future of this channel. Don't worry, we're not going anywhere, but regular viewers may have noticed that since the start of the year, I haven't been doing any sponsorships. I decided to try the experiment, and so far it's been really good in a lot of ways. It's let me focus all my time and energy on making the videos I want to make without spending hours trying to figure out how to sell you someone else's product. With that extra freedom, I've been able to make longer, more in-depth videos, and I've been able to write real conclusions without having to worry about transitioning into a sales pitch. I genuinely believe this year has featured many of the best videos I've ever made, and I don't think that's a coincidence. And that's all great, but the thing is, making 12-tone is also my full-time job, and sponsorships were a huge part of my income. They're how I paid my bills, and without them, I've been operating at a loss for most of the last 6 months. And that's where you come in. The other main way I fund these videos is through Patreon, which allows viewers who like my work and think it's worth supporting to help fund it directly. Now, I want to be clear that there's no pressure here, and if you can't afford to support me, or if you just don't want to, that's totally fine. I made the choice to publish 12-tone for free, and you should never feel guilty about not paying for it. You don't have to pay for it, that's the point. But if you can pay for it, and you want to pay for it, I would really appreciate your help in keeping this channel sponsor-free for as long as possible. I'm really proud of what I've been able to accomplish accomplished so far with this experiment, and I'm definitely going to keep going with it until at least the end of the year, but after that, we'll have to see what happens. So yeah, link to my Patreon in the description, and as a bonus, all my patrons get to vote to help me decide which songs to make videos about, so for as little as $1 a month, you can help shape the content on this channel too. Anyway, thanks for watching, thanks to our Patreon patrons for making these videos possible, and extra special thanks to our featured patrons, Susan Jones, Jill Sundgaard, Duck, Howard Levine, Warren Huart, Kevin Wilamowski, Grant Aldonas, and Michael Mole. If you want to help out and help us pick the next song we analyze too, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.